I guess I should have caught on sooner. There was this simmering tension in the house that I kept brushing off as normal marital ups and downs. Morgan and I have been married for 5 years, and for most of that time, I thought I knew her inside out. We were never perfect, but we had our routines: the morning coffee, the weekly grocery runs, the Sunday Netflix marathons. Lately, though, things just felt off. At first, it was easy for me to blame the little signs on the stress of work or my own paranoia. Maybe she was irritable because her job was crazy, or maybe I was reading too much into every sigh and dismissive shrug. But I can't lie. I started feeling this quiet discomfort in my chest whenever I saw how distant her eyes looked when we sat down for dinner. I tried asking her if something was bothering her, but the only response I got was a vague, "I'm fine," followed by a quick change of topic. And for a while, I believed her. I believed her because I needed to. I loved her, and in my mind, love meant trusting her word, no matter how short or dismissive her tone was. But there's a limit to how long you can keep your eyes shut when every sign is screaming at you to wake up and look closer. It's sort of like living in a house that's too quiet. Eventually, you realize that silence itself can be a warning that something's very wrong. It started with small things, like her suddenly muting her phone when I walked into the room. I'd hear the soft buzz of a text, but by the time I glanced over, her screen was black, and she was turning away from me, phone clutched tight. Then there was the change in her schedule. She started coming home later from work with vague excuses. "Client meeting," she'd say, or "went out with the girls," but something in her voice never quite matched up to her words. Once, I found a receipt for an expensive bottle of wine in her purse. Normally, that wouldn't be an issue. Morgan loves her wine. But the date on the receipt was from a night she claimed to be at a colleague's birthday party, where she was supposedly only sipping cocktails. I shrugged it off, feeling a nagging itch at the back of my head that told me I wasn't seeing the whole picture. It wasn't just the receipts. She became weirdly protective of her personal space. If I leaned in to look at her laptop, she'd slam it shut or switch tabs so fast I barely caught a glimpse of what was on the screen. Every conversation ended with a clipped tone or some defensive jab like, "You don't trust me?" or "Can't I have a little privacy?" I felt my stomach turn with every instance, but I also felt cornered, unsure whether to confront her or keep observing. Then came a new perfume. Morgan never bothered changing her perfume on a whim. She'd wear her favorite brand for years. But one morning, I noticed a different scent on her that was too strong, too sweet, not at all her style. I asked about it. She rolled her eyes, saying it was a gift from a coworker. She mumbled something about it being rude not to at least try it out. But the way she avoided my gaze told me there was more to it than that. I didn't push, although my heart drummed in my chest, telling me to demand answers. I'd always trusted Morgan to tell me when something was off or when she needed space. But this time, every new detail felt like a breadcrumb leading somewhere dark. And the scariest part was I felt alone in my suspicions. I couldn't talk to my friends about it, partly because I was embarrassed, partly because I wasn't sure if I was being paranoid. All I could do was watch and wait, a lump of fear growing in my throat with each passing day. The moment I knew something was truly wrong came one Thursday night. Morgan had just returned from another late shift at work. She was wound up, agitated, practically barking orders at me to get out of her way so she could head straight for the shower. The problem was, her hair looked freshly washed, still damp, actually. And there was this faint trace of cologne on her clothes that definitely didn't belong to me. I'd never smelled it before, and it sure as hell wasn't hers. I tried not to jump to conclusions on the spot, but my mind was racing. I thought, why would she smell like some other man's cologne? My chest tightened, and I felt this rush of panic, like the ground was slipping out from under me. But I had to keep it cool if I wanted to figure out what was going on for real. While she was in the shower, I did something I'd never done before. I searched her phone. I hated stooping to that level. I always believed that trust was sacred. But at that point, I figured if something was going on, I needed tangible proof. Sure enough, I found messages that made my stomach lurch. Strange flirty texts from someone named Tyler that read more like lovers' banter than any professional exchange. There were photos, too. Nothing too explicit, but still enough to confirm that Tyler wasn't just a colleague. My hand shook so hard I almost dropped her phone. Panic gave way to raw anger, and for a moment I considered storming into the bathroom to confront her right then and there. But I held back. I realized I needed more time, more evidence, because Morgan could lie her way out of a text or two. She was good at that. She'd just spin some ridiculous story about how Tyler was a friend in need or how I misunderstood the context. No, I wanted to see how deep this rabbit hole really went before I made any moves. So I put her phone back exactly as I found it, trying to keep my breathing under control. By the time she stepped out of the shower, I was pretending to watch TV in the living room, my heart pounding in my ears. She shot me a curt, "Hey," and sauntered into the bedroom, like she hadn't just brought another man's sin into our home. I clenched my jaw, feeling that first wave of betrayal swirl around in my gut. I had my proof, but everything was about to get a whole lot more complicated. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Morgan smiling at someone else, giving that same warm, playful laugh she used to reserve for me. I'd see flashes of her phone lighting up with new messages, each one another nail in the coffin of our marriage. My mind was full of half-finished stories and worst-case scenarios, all jumbled together into a knot of anxiety. I knew I had to find out how deep this went, but I also felt sick about what I might uncover. The next morning, she seemed uncharacteristically chirpy, humming in the kitchen while she made her coffee. She even gave me a quick peck on the cheek before darting off to the car. It felt like she was overcompensating, and that only intensified my suspicion. I wondered if, in her twisted logic, acting extra sweet would keep me from noticing the stink of betrayal on her breath. Once she was gone, I started looking for more clues. I went through every corner of the house, her closet, the laundry basket, the bathroom drawers. I tried to keep calm, but my hands were trembling by the time I found her journal tucked away in a nightstand drawer. Morgan was never one to keep a diary, or at least that's what she always told me. Yet there it was, with a lock on it, ironically shaped like a tiny heart. I considered prying it open, but there was only so much snooping I could stomach in one morning. Instead, I grabbed my laptop and checked our joint bank account. She'd recently made withdrawals at odd times, late nights, weekends, even once in the middle of a workday, amounts that didn't correspond to anything we normally spent money on. Worse, there were charges for restaurants we'd never been to, gifts from places that didn't match up with anything I'd seen around the house. My heart sank with each new discovery, like I was losing some invisible game I never knew I was playing. By the afternoon, I'd pieced together enough details to form a clearer picture of what was happening, yet questions still buzzed in my mind. How long had this been going on? Why Tyler, of all people? What did he have that I didn't? I felt humiliated, like an idiot in my own home, clueless and ignored. I kept vacillating between seething rage and this hollow ache in my chest, not sure which emotion was worse. Everything pointed to the fact that Morgan was no longer the woman I once knew, or maybe she'd always been this person, and I was just too blind to see it. I knew I needed answers, but part of me was terrified to find out how deep her lies went. So I bided my time, letting the anger simmer under the surface, knowing that sooner or later, the truth would force a confrontation that neither of us could walk away from unscathed. A couple of days went by, and with each passing hour, my suspicion dug its claws in deeper. Morgan continued to flash these smug little smiles whenever she glanced at her phone. She'd saunter around the house with an air of superiority, acting as though the world revolved around her. It made my stomach churn. One evening, she crossed the line in a way I couldn't ignore. I asked if she could pick up some groceries on her way home. She rolled her eyes and snapped back with a sarcastic, "Don't you have two hands?" It was jarring. She'd never been overly sweet, but this was bitchy on a whole new level. The tension between us was now thick enough to cut with a knife. That night, she went to bed early. I pretended to be engrossed in a show on my laptop, but as soon as I heard her soft snores, I crept back into the bedroom. I carefully eased her phone off the nightstand. It was locked, of course, so I slipped into the kitchen to see if I could guess the code. I tried her birthday, no luck. Our wedding anniversary, no luck. Then I tried a random pattern I'd once seen her punch in at the ATM, and to my shock, it worked. The phone unlocked with a tiny vibration. What I saw was worse than I'd imagined. More texts from Tyler, some of them downright explicit. My face burned as I read them. There were random pictures of her at a fancy restaurant, one I'd never taken her to, holding a glass of champagne, dressed in a clingy black dress I didn't recognize. They joked about how clueless I was, how he better not notice the hickey next time, followed by laughter emojis. My hands shook with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. My chest felt like someone was squeezing the life out of it as I stared at the phone. I wanted to scream, to wake her up and demand answers right then. But I didn't. My rational mind told me there was a bigger game at play here. She was bold enough to make a fool out of me right under my nose, so maybe I could use that arrogance against her. I locked her phone, placed it back where I found it, and made a quiet decision. I'd gather the final pieces I needed, then confront her in a way she'd never see coming. Slipping back into the living room, I felt oddly calm, though my heart was pounding with fury. Anger and heartbreak simmered inside me, but I knew I had to channel those feelings into something more productive. The worst part was that, despite everything, I still felt a flicker of love for her. It was like a disease, lingering even when every sign pointed to leaving. But the bigger part of me was done playing the fool. Morgan could hide behind her pretty lies for a little while longer. She had no idea how close I was to exposing everything. I decided to poke the bear a little. The morning after I snooped on her phone, I casually mentioned I was thinking of going to a restaurant downtown, specifically the one I saw in those photos. I didn't name it outright, just hinted that it had good reviews and that maybe we should check it out this weekend. She froze for a millisecond, her expression flickering to something like panic, then replaced it with her usual indifference. "Oh," she said, pretending to be unimpressed. "I think it's overrated. We can do better." She tried to play it off with a dismissive shrug, but I caught the nervous flicker in her eyes. It fueled my anger, yet I kept my face neutral. "Overrated, huh?" I pressed gently. "We never tried it, though. How would you know?" She hesitated, shooting me a thin-lipped smile that screamed liar. "A friend went there," she answered, a little too quickly. "She told me all about it. Not worth it." Then she yawned, like she was bored with the topic already, and started scrolling aimlessly on her phone. That was the opening I needed. My blood was boiling, but I reined it in enough to lean against the counter and say, "So, this friend, she give you any details? Maybe how expensive the wine is?" Morgan glared up at me like I'd just insulted her intelligence. "What's with the interrogation? Can I just have my opinion without you grilling me about it?" She was revving up for a fight that much was obvious. I felt a pang of heartbreak beneath the anger, recalling how we used to share silly stories without suspicion or judgment. But now everything was a landmine. "Relax," I said, forcing a casual shrug. "Just seemed like something you'd actually enjoy, fancy wine, fancy food, you know." I let the sentence hang in the air, watching her reaction like a hawk. Sure enough, she looked irritated, as though my very presence offended her. She folded her arms and snapped, "I'm going out with friends tonight. Don't wait up." With that, she brushed past me, grabbed her car keys, and left, leaving me alone in the silence of our once happy home. I stood there, staring at the door long after it slammed shut. The tension in my body was electric, coiled up, and ready to explode. That was the moment I decided I couldn't keep playing her game forever. I might have been careful up until now, snooping discreetly, biting my tongue when I wanted to scream, but my patience was wearing thin. The next confrontation wouldn't be so subtle, and Morgan wouldn't get off so easy. All I needed was the right moment, and I knew it would come soon. After she left, I found myself pacing the living room, adrenaline pumping through my veins. The walls seemed too close, like the house itself was suffocating me with the weight of her deceit. If she was going to treat me like a fool, I decided I'd embrace the role for just a bit longer, long enough to catch her in the act. My heart pounded with a mixture of anger and a strange, cold determination. I needed proof so undeniable that even Morgan, with her endless barrage of lies, couldn't worm her way out of it. I called an old friend of mine, Derek, someone I hadn't spoken to in years but knew I could trust. We hashed out a plan that sounded like something out of a bad thriller movie. He recommended a buddy who did PI work on the side. At first, I wasn't sure I wanted to go that far, but the thought of Morgan's smug expression pushed me over the edge. If there was more to uncover, I wanted it all. That same night, I started digging into her social media, scanning the posts, tags, and comments that might connect to Tyler. I felt a twinge of guilt, like I was violating her privacy. Then I remembered the texts and pictures I'd seen. The guilt melted away, replaced by a burning sense of indignation. My wife was out there, probably doing God knows what, while I was stuck at home playing detective. Around midnight, I got a text from Morgan, "Don't wait up. Might stay at Jess's tonight." Something about the message felt too calculated. She was taunting me, or maybe throwing me a bone, hoping I'd swallow yet another lame excuse. Every nerve in my body was on edge, but I forced myself to remain calm. I sent a quick reply, "Okay, be safe," then set my phone down. There was no point in arguing with her over text. The confrontation I had in mind was a face-to-face kind of deal. By the time I finally tried to sleep, I was wired and wide awake. My mind looped the same questions. Why would she do this? Is it worth salvaging? How far am I willing to go to make her pay? The night felt endless, and I had this sinking feeling that every passing minute was dragging me closer to a breaking point I couldn't walk back from. The next few days felt like a blur. Morgan's attitude grew bolder, almost like she wanted me to catch her in the act. She'd prance around the house in new outfits, drop unsubtle hints about her late nights, and barely hit her phone anymore. It was as if she was testing how much I could handle before snapping. The crazy part was, I felt myself getting close to that breaking point. Every now and then, I'd wonder if she caught on to my suspicions. She'd throw these sideways glances my way, like she was gauging my reaction to her every move. But I'd learned to keep my anger on a tight leash, at least on the surface. In private, though, I was seething. My mind was consumed by fantasies of calling her out in the middle of a dinner party or crashing one of her work outings, just to see her face freeze in shock. During one particularly tense morning, she sashayed into the kitchen wearing a tight, low-cut dress. Our fridge door was open, and I was rummaging for something to eat. She sighed dramatically and said, "I'm going to be home late again. Don't wait up." I couldn't stop the flash of rage that tightened my grip on the carton of eggs. "Another late night?" I asked, trying not to sound too accusatory. She smirked, letting her gaze flick over me like I was nothing. "That's what I said," she replied in a tone dripping with condescension. "I'm busy. You might try being a bit more productive yourself. Or is that too hard for you?" Her words sank in like a dagger. I felt my blood boil, but I swallowed the anger, only letting a tight smile show. "Guess I'll find something else to do," I said, my voice low. Morgan rolled her eyes and brushed past me, her perfume lingering in the air. The door slammed, leaving me alone in the kitchen, fists clenched at my sides. I stood there staring at the half-open fridge, my appetite gone. It dawned on me how far our marriage had fallen. No more gentle teasing, no affectionate goodbyes. Instead, we had these sharp-tongued exchanges that left me stewing in resentment. I'd never thought I'd be the kind of man to consider revenge, but every insult Morgan hurled my way chipped away at whatever conscience I had left. I was done playing the good guy in her twisted little game. For a brief second, I considered trashing the kitchen out of sheer frustration, throwing plates, smashing glasses. But I forced myself to take a deep breath. I couldn't afford a messy outburst yet. If I was going to make her pay for every lie, every sneer, and every betrayal, it would be cold, calculated, and impossible to forget. A few nights later, curiosity got the better of me. I couldn't just sit at home, staring at the walls, while she gallivanted around town as if she were single. So, I decided to follow her. It felt wild, like I was in some cheap detective movie, but at that point, I didn't care how absurd it looked. I needed to see the truth with my own eyes. That night, she left around 7. I waited a careful 15 minutes before grabbing my keys, heart hammering against my ribs. I tailed her car at a distance, praying she wouldn't notice my headlights lingering a few cars behind. She pulled up to a place on the other side of town, a swanky bar lit up with neon lights. I parked around the corner, out of view, and watched her step out in a tight black dress and heels I'd never seen before. My jaw clenched at the sight of her. She looked good, damn good, and the fact that she wasn't dressing like that for me stung more than I could admit. Not even 5 minutes passed before I saw some tall guy emerge from the bar, leaning casually against the entrance like he owned the place. The moment she spotted him, her whole face lit up. No doubt in my mind, Tyler. My stomach twisted. She strolled right up to him, gave him a hug that lasted too long. Then they walked inside together, arms brushing intimately. I sat there in the darkness of my car, fighting the urge to charge in. A mad part of me wanted to bust through the door, punch Tyler square in the face, and drag Morgan out by her hair. But I forced myself to stay put. I was determined not to lose it. Not yet. I needed to gather the final bits of evidence to confront her in a way she couldn't weasel out of. So I snapped a few photos from my phone. Her leaning into him, their hands casually touching, faces inches apart. Every image felt like a knife plunging deeper into my chest. An hour passed, then another. Eventually, they walked out, laughing like a couple of teenagers, oblivious to the storm brewing in my head. They headed to his car, and my heart sank when they drove off together. I followed at a distance, fists tight on the steering wheel. They pulled into some fancy apartment building, and just like that, disappeared inside. That moment was the final blow to any lingering doubt I had. My wife was in another man's apartment, in the middle of the night. There was no twisting that into an innocent story. Sitting there alone, staring at the building's glass doors, I felt hollow. Anger flared, then twisted into something cold and sharp. I took a deep breath and left, my mind already planning how I'd confront Morgan. No, not just confront her. How I'd lay every last piece of evidence on the table and watch her lies crumble. She might think she was unstoppable, but after what I'd seen tonight, she was about to find out just how far I could go. I was still on edge the next morning. The images of Morgan and Tyler at his apartment were burned into my mind, and sleep had been nothing but a cruel joke. By the time she finally strolled in, wearing yesterday's dress and an infuriatingly casual grin, I was at my limit. She tossed her purse onto the couch as if everything was totally normal, like she hadn't just spent the night in another man's bed. "Morning," she muttered, heading straight to the kitchen to brew herself some coffee. There wasn't a hint of apology in her voice. She didn't even bother to make up a lie this time. No fake excuse about staying at Jess's place. No half-hearted story about a broken-down car. The pure gall of it made my blood boil. I followed her in, arms folded. "Where were you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. My heart thumped so hard I worried she might hear it. She gave me a bored look, as though the question itself was annoying. "Out," she said flatly, flicking her hair over her shoulder. "Relax. I'm here now, aren't I?" That was it. I felt a surge of rage, my chest tightening. "You think you can just show up like nothing happened?" My voice rose despite my best efforts. "I'm not stupid, Morgan." She snorted, rolling her eyes in a show of contempt. "You could have fooled me." Her words dripped with sarcasm, and it felt like a slap in the face. "Maybe if you had more going on in your life, you wouldn't be so obsessed with mine." I slammed my fist on the counter, and the coffee mug rattled. "Don't talk to me like that," I barked, anger flaring hot in my chest. "I've put up with enough of your lies and disrespect. I know what you've been doing. You think I don't see the late nights, the phone calls, the sneaking around? I'm not blind." Morgan's eyes flickered with something akin to surprise. For a split second, I saw fear there. But she covered it up with another nasty sneer. "You're delusional," she hissed. "I told you, I was with friends. And frankly, it's none of your business." She moved to storm out of the kitchen, but I grabbed her wrist, not roughly, just enough to make her look at me. "We're married," I said through clenched teeth. "It is my business. I'm done playing nice, Morgan." She yanked her hand away, eyes blazing with anger. "I don't care what you think," she spat. "I'm tired of tiptoeing around your insecurities. Get a life or leave me alone." Her voice cracked for a moment, and for a split second, I wondered if there was any guilt buried under all that venom. But she spun on her heel and headed for the bedroom before I could say another word. I stood there, heart hammering, feeling a toxic mix of hurt, fury, and something even darker. The worst part? I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. She might have backed down for now, but I'd seen enough to know that confrontation alone wouldn't fix this. If she wanted a war, I was ready to give it to her, this time on my own terms. I needed someone to confide in. Someone who wouldn't just nod sympathetically, but actually help me figure out my next move. So, I reached out to Derek again. He was the only friend I trusted enough not to judge me for stooping to private investigators and covert surveillance. Plus, he had that calm, analytical way of looking at things that I desperately needed right now. We met up at a local diner, the kind of place with cracked vinyl seats and a lingering smell of burnt coffee. It was nearly empty, which suited us just fine. I slid into the booth across from him and tried to steady my nerves. "You look like hell," Derek said, no sugarcoating in his tone. "Rough night?" I gave a dry laugh. "You could say that. Let's just say Morgan and I had a heated exchange." He leaned in, brow furrowed. "She's not getting physical with you, is she?" I shook my head. No, nothing like that. Just words. Lots of sharp words. But at this rate, I'm worried we'll both cross some line we can't come back from." I paused, swirling the coffee in my cup. "And there's more. I followed her to some bar. She left with the guy Tyler and spent the night at his place. So yeah, I guess that line's already been crossed." Derek's jaw tightened. "Damn, man. I'm sorry." I shrugged, though my insides felt like a knot of barbed wire. "I appreciate it, but it is what it is. Question is, how do I handle it now? Do you want to fight for the marriage, or do you want out?" Derek asked bluntly. I took a long breath, feeling the familiar surge of bitterness tighten my chest. I'm not even sure anymore. Part of me wants to burn it all down. Another part wants to make her feel what I'm feeling, show her what betrayal tastes like. His eyes flicked over me, studying my face. Revenge is tempting, sure, but it can get ugly fast. You gotta be careful. I nodded. That's why I'm calling the PI again. I want every shred of evidence. Pictures, texts, phone records, anything I can use if she tries to twist the narrative. I'm not letting her walk away scot-free, acting like I'm the crazy one. Derek exhaled, then gave a half-smile. All right, man. I'll help however I can. But just remember, once you open that Pandora's box, there's no going back. You get that evidence, you confront her, it could blow up your whole life. I stared into my coffee, my anger pulsing under my skin. My life's already blown up, I said quietly, imagining Morgan's self-satisfied sneer. Now it's about taking control of the fallout. We talked for another hour, hashing out the details of how we'd proceed and what next steps made sense. By the time I left, I felt a grim determination settling in my gut. The betrayal I'd once feared learning about was now out in the open, and there was no one seeing it. I was done lying to myself. If Morgan wanted a war, I was gearing up for the final battle, and this time, I wasn't planning to lose. It didn't take long for the PI to come through with more dirt on Morgan. When I got the email with the attached photos, my stomach twisted into knots. There she was, smiling, laughing, pressed up against Tyler outside that same fancy bar I'd followed her to. Another shot showed them out on a date at some upscale restaurant, clinking glasses of wine, her hand resting on his knee. And the clincher, a grainy night vision image of them entering his apartment together, hands locked tight, her head resting on his shoulder. I stared at these photos for a while, a hurricane of emotions raging through me. My first reaction was that old, familiar anger. It blazed so hot. I felt like I could smash my laptop into pieces. But underneath that, a surprising calm began to settle. Because now there was no more question of maybe or what if. The facts were right in front of me, plain as day. She was cheating, and she wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. The PI also included a brief report detailing the times, dates, and locations of each rendezvous. It was thorough, almost clinical in its presentation. Subject observed at 9:15 p.m. entering the bar with Tyler. Subject left the premises at 11:02 p.m. Subject arrived at Tyler's apartment complex at 11:30 p.m. And so on. It was eerie seeing my life broken down into bullet points, but it gave me a strange sense of control. At least now, I knew exactly what was going on. I called Derek right away, reading bits of the report aloud. The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. He was as stunned as I was at how brazen Morgan had been. "You sure you're okay?" he asked quietly, concern evident in his voice. I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Okay? No. But I will be. Now that I've got everything I need, it's time I show her I'm not the clueless idiot she thinks I am." Derek exhaled, and I could practically hear him rubbing the tension out of his temples. "You're going to confront her?" "Yeah," I answered, my tone colder than I expected. "And this time, she won't be talking her way out of it." He was quiet for a moment. "Just promise me you won't do anything crazy, man. I know you're pissed, and you have every right to be. But if you do something you can't take back." "I know," I cut him off, tension vibrating in my voice. "I'm not about to commit a crime. But she's not going to walk away from this like nothing happened either. Trust me." After we hung up, I sat there, staring at the photos again. 1,000 thoughts rushed through my head, memories of happier times, of our wedding day, of late-night talks that once felt so genuine. All of it now felt like a twisted joke. My heart pounded with a furious rhythm, each beat reminding me that I had a choice. I could either crumble beneath the weight of her betrayal or turn that pain into something she'd never forget. Slamming the laptop shut, I made my decision. I'd expose her lies so thoroughly that even she wouldn't be able to deny it. And once she saw how deeply she'd underestimated me, there'd be no pretending, no half-baked excuses. This wouldn't just be a casual confrontation. I was planning something far more calculated than that. The night I finally decided to confront Morgan for real, the house felt like it was holding its breath. Every clock tick and refrigerator hum seemed amplified. I'd laid out the damning photos on the kitchen table, printouts from the PI's email, neatly arranged in chronological order. There were enough images and details to paint a crystal-clear picture of her affair. No more gray areas, no more misunderstandings. Just undeniable proof. She walked in around 10, her lips drawn in that same dismissive line I'd come to despise. She tossed her purse onto the couch without so much as a greeting, like she owned the place and everyone in it. I waited by the table, arms folded, heart pounding. I felt a surge of grim satisfaction seeing her eyes flick down at the photos. "What's this?" she snapped, frowning. Before I could respond, she glared at me. Why are you printing random pictures of me? I almost laughed at the absurdity of her denial. These are random? I said quietly, tapping a finger on the paper. You and Tyler at his apartment. You and Tyler at that bar. Pretty sure that's your hand on his thigh right there. Care to explain? She went pale for a moment, her bravado cracking. Then, as if flicking a switch, she feigned outrage. You've been spying on me? That's disgusting. You've been cheating on me, I shot back, voice rising with raw anger. That's not exactly wholesome behavior, is it? My hand curled into a fist at my side. I know everything, Morgan. You can drop the act. She faltered, a flash of guilt in her expression, but it vanished quickly, replaced by bitterness. You're the one who decided to snoop around like some psycho. What did you expect to find? I closed my eyes, pushing back the urge to shout. Don't turn this on me. You made your bed. Or, more accurately, you made Tyler's bed. Now you get to deal with the fallout. She scoffed, arms folding protectively over her chest. Oh, please. You think you're so righteous? You're not exactly Mr. Perfect. You're boring. You're predictable. If you'd been paying attention to me in the first place, maybe I wouldn't have. I slammed my palm on the table, making the photos tremble. Don't you dare blame me for your choice to sneak around. Own it. You wanted something else, so you took it. Fine. Now you're going to face the consequences. Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of fear. What consequences? You think you can bully me into staying in this marriage? She tried to sound tough, but her voice wavered ever so slightly. A cold calm settled over me, something I'd never felt before. I'm not bullying you into anything, I said. I'm done trying to fix this disaster. But you can bet I won't let you walk away like nothing happened. I've got more than enough evidence to make sure this hits you where it hurts. She opened her mouth to reply, but nothing came out. For a second, the silence between us was louder than any shout could have been. In that moment, it felt like a point of no return, an invisible line that, once crossed, would shatter every last remnant of our old life together. Finally, she found her voice. You can't just ruin my life because I was unhappy. Her eyes were wet, but I couldn't tell if it was guilt, panic, or anger. I nodded slowly. Watch me. Despite the fierce tension in the air, a part of me still felt a pang of sorrow. We'd shared real moments once, real laughs, real love, or so I believed. But looking at her now, all I saw was a stranger who'd tossed aside everything we'd built. And if she thought my revenge would stop at just these photos, she was sorely mistaken.